Hi, welcome to the Spirit of Prophecy. I'm your host, Luther Mark. In this video, we'll be getting into Revelation chapter 4. So let's get into it. Will be two exciting chapters, chapter 4 and 5. They kind of go together. And it's a vision that John has of the throne room and the things that he is being shown in the throne room. So what we can read in the book of Revelation chapters 1, 2, and 3, the first chapter Jesus is appearing to John, and in chapters 2 and 3 he gives him the letters to the churches and tells him to write it down, the things he's going to show him, and send it to the 7 churches. Now, as I pointed out in previous videos, the big emphasis and the reason that Jesus came was for the book of Revelation, to give John the book of Revelation to give to the church. And again, the book of Revelation, it is the revealing of Jesus, and it's the revealing of some of the mysteries of God. And so that's what we want to get into here. And that's what Revelation chapter 4 and 5 represent. Is they're a mystery of God, or they're the part of the mystery of God. Actually, a big part. So there is a verse in Ephesians, and it has everything to do with chapter 4 and 5. And it says, "And he put all things under his feet, and gave him to be head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills all in all." Now the important thing there, it says in that first line, "And he put all things under his feet and gave him to be head over all things to the church." So a lot of people may not have that understanding yet. So let's kind of begin to grasp that as we get into Revelation chapter 4 and verse 1. And so in Revelation chapter 4, verse 1, it says, "After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, 'Come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this.'" And John says, "And the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, 'Come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this.'" So again, this is a different, separate event. Jesus is calling John up to heaven in a way that's a sort of a rapture. He's being called up to the third heaven. And Jesus is going to show him things which must take place after this vision. Okay, let's get into it further. In Revelation 4:2, John says, once he is told to come up here, then it picks up here in 4:2. It says, "Immediately I was in the Spirit." So it's not his physical body that was taken up. It was his spirit that was taken up. That's kind of interesting. I can kind of relate to that. Again, watch my introduction video. You'll see my own testimony. In Revelation 4:2 it says, "Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne set in heaven, and one sat on the throne." In Revelation 4:3 it says, "And he who sat there was like a jasper and a sardis stone in appearance. And there was a rainbow around the throne, in appearance like an emerald." Now, who we're talking about here, I would suggest to you, is God the Father. Remember, a lot of times we picture in our mind like an older, muscular gentleman with white, long hair and a white beard, kind of like a senior version of Jesus. After all, he is the Father, right? In a way, it's kind of like we envision or read and see pictures of like Zeus or some of these other Greek gods, Poseidon, he's Neptune, whatever. But that's not exactly how the Bible describes God the Father. We have to remember John 4:24, which was what I was told in that dream, in the vision that I had, was that God is spirit, and those who worship him worship in spirit and in truth. And so think of this vision that John's having, and he's looking at one sitting on the throne. And think of God the Father as spirit, how his spirit might look. And John describes in 4:3, he says, "And he who sat there was like a jasper and a sardis stone in appearance, and there was a rainbow around the throne, in appearance like an emerald." So very shiny kind of appearance. In Revelation 4:4, he begins to describe what's around the throne. He says, around the throne were 24 thrones. And on those thrones, I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white robes, and they had crowns of gold on their heads. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about the 24 elders here. So a lot of people say or teach that the 24 elders are 24 angels. But there again, I would disagree with that. Why would I disagree with that? Because it says they have crowns of gold on their heads. And no other place in the Bible do we ever see that an angel's wearing a crown. What we can understand and what we can see written in the Bible, and I've already discussed in Revelation chapter 2, is that we get crowns. So the other thing that we can understand there have been people who have suggested that the 24 elders are the 12 major prophets from the Old Testament and the 12 apostles from the New Testament. Now, the problem that I would have of that is we have to remember that John, who's being shown this vision, is one of those 12 apostles. In fact, he's the last living apostle at this point in time when he's writing this. All the other apostles, the 12 apostles, have been killed or martyred. Killed and martyred, I should say. But John's the only one left alive. He's on the island of Patmos. And the point that I'm making here is when John sees the 24 elders, he doesn't mention seeing himself. So I don't know if it's the 12 apostles or not. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say it's 12 prophets from the Old Testament. However, it could be. Maybe everybody's there but John, you know. But the key is, and we have to think about this, you know, as well. There were people that were raised from the grave from the Old Testament when Jesus was resurrected. And so we find that in Matthew 27. It says, the graves were opened and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. Now we have to remember, we already told that Jesus in Revelation 1 that he has the keys of Hades and death. And so there were people, we can read in the stories in the Old Testament and the New Testament for that matter, there were people who were in something called Abraham's bosom. And so Jesus went down to Hades. We're also told that as well. And he was there for about 3 days, 3 nights before his resurrection. And one of the reasons that he went there was to bring some of these folks from the Old Testament out with him. And that's what we see there at Matthew. Graves were opened and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised with him. And so I would suggest very strongly to you that that's who the 24 elders are. Is there probably at least 12 of the prophets from the Old Testament, or definitely 24 holy men from the Old Testament that were raised with him, and they would be elders, they would be wearing crowns. So that is the thing that makes the most sense. Now, at this point in time, let's go ahead and cover that. Have the 12 apostles, or the other, let's call them 11 apostles because John's still alive, would they be part of these 24 elders? Well, again, I guess they could be. You know, the Bible does say, and Jesus told the thief on the cross, he said, today you'll be with me in paradise. And another verse says, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So yes, I guess the 11 apostles who have already passed away could be there, possibly. They could be part of the 24 elders. But that's who the 24 elders are. They're saints. They're saints, and they're people who have passed away that have been, their spirits are in heaven. For sure, there are 24 from the Old Testament because there were people who were raised with Christ when he was risen. Now, having said that, why 24? Well, we don't know, but we can know this. In the Old Testament, Jesus required 24 Levite priests to man the temple, you might say, at all times. And so there's something about the number 24 that the Lord likes 24 to be around him when he's there in the temple. So anyway, hopefully that covers a little bit about the 24 elders and the 24 thrones kind of thing. And again, around the throne were 24 thrones, and on those thrones I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white robes, and they had crowns of gold on their heads, which I've already suggested would be a sign of sanctification. They're wearing gold crowns, okay? All right, moving on down to Revelation 4 or 5. What can we learn from it? And it says, and from the throne proceeded lightnings, thunders, and voices. 7 lamps of fire were burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. Now, we've already seen the 7 spirits of God mentioned in Revelation 1, verse 4, and also Revelation chapter 3, verse 1. And in Revelation, or 1:4 rather, it's 7 lamps of fire, 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne. And that's very similar to what we see here. 7 lamps of fire were burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. So again, in Revelation 1, we're told he has the 7 spirits of God which are before the throne. Now we can understand that there's 7 lamps of fire were burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. And what I suggested to you in Revelation 1 is those 7 lamps was the menorah. And also in Revelation 1, when Jesus first appears to John, he's standing in the midst of the 7 lamps, which again is the menorah, which we now know represent the 7 spirits of God. So the 7 flames of fire on the 7 lamps, which is the menorah, they represent the 7 spirits of God. Okay, and so we also saw the 7 spirits mentioned in Revelation 3, and there's also mentioned and angels, and as I've already pointed out, the word and is there. So again, we can understand that the 7 spirits of God are not angels, but they're there with angels because it says and angels. And the 7 angels, or the 7 stars, represent the 7 angels of the 7 churches, which is different than the 7 spirits of God. So again, we still have to find out what the 7 spirits of God, what they are, and I'm going to go into that here in chapter 4. However, that will be the last video on chapter 4. So for right now, for just another minute, I'm going to kind of skip it, but what we can know, based on what we read here, the 7 lamps of fire were burning before the throne. That is the menorah. And the 7 lamps, the 7 flames which are burning on the 7 lamps, these do represent the 7 spirits of God. It says, which are the 7 spirits of God. Okay, so again, we're going to get into that. Just wait for the last video on chapter 4. Now, in 4:6, it says, before the throne there was a sea of glass, which we find in heaven. It's a golden sea of glass. It says, like crystal. And in the midst of the throne and around the throne were 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and back. Now, the 4 living creatures, we do want to talk about that a little bit. I do have some notes. We see the same 4 living creatures mentioned in Ezekiel 1, in chapter 1 there in Ezekiel. Very similar descriptions. And the descriptions we find both in Ezekiel chapter 1 and here in Revelation 4 are the same. In Revelation 4:7 it says, the first living creature was like a lion, the second living creature like a calf, the third living creature had a face like a man, and the fourth living creature was like a flying eagle. So here's just some notes I've got on the 4 living creatures. It says they represent the 4 main principalities in this world among all the creatures. In other words, they represent the 4 main principalities in this world among all the living creatures. Now, what I mean by that is the lion might represent the mightiest animal among wild animals. The ox is the strongest of all domesticated animals. And the eagle is one of the biggest and strongest among all birds, whereas mankind is above all. He's given dominion over all creatures. And so that's kind of what these 4 living creatures represent. Let's see if I have anything else there. Okay. Now, the other thing that we might want to know and understand about these 4 living creatures, which I really haven't heard too many people say, when we get into the seals and the 4 horsemen, we're going to notice something special about the 4 living creatures here in just a minute. We're going to pay attention to when the seals are opened and the 4 horsemen are released, because the first living creature describes that first seal and that first horseman, the second living creature, the second horseman, and the second seal, and so forth. Let's just pay attention to that and remember that as we get further along into the book of Revelation. Now let's move on to verse 8. It says, the four living creatures, each having 6 wings. Again, we find this same thing in Ezekiel. They have wings, and they were full of eyes around and within. And they do not rest day or night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was and who is to come. Now I'm going to come back to one part there. Let's move on to 4:9. It says, whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who sits on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. And they cast their crowns before the throne, saying, you are worthy. In verse 11, they say, you are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. So let's get into this a little deeper. The 4 living creatures are very mysterious. Now, I've also heard it taught that they represent, one of them represents a man, an eagle, an ox, and a lion. Now, when we read in Ezekiel, sometimes we can compare the prophecies, and sometimes we'll find out that John knows a little more than the Old Testament guys. But sometimes they know very distinct and specific things. And so what we can read in Ezekiel, if we went there, is we'll find out that they have each of the 4 creatures has the 4 same faces. In other words, they all have a face of a man. They all have a face of the eagle. They all have a face of an ox. And they all have a face of a lion. And so each face is on the 4 sides of their heads. And John, again, it's kind of the same description. Maybe he doesn't say that because he already knows it from Ezekiel. So they each kind of point individual things out about that. Kind of interesting. I've also heard it taught that these same 4, a man, an eagle, an ox, and a lion, also represent the 4 main tribes, or that's the symbol for the 4 main tribes of the 12 tribes. So on their flags, each of the 12 tribes had symbols on their flags, and these were the symbols on the 4 main tribes. So maybe that's got something to do with it as well. Now, the other thing I'd like to point out in verse 4, or chapter 4, verse 8, where it says, holy, holy, holy. Now, I'm looking at it on a computer, and I can click on that after holy, holy, holy. There's a little note there. Probably in your Bible, you have notes at the bottom or commentary, and we can understand that what I'm looking at here, for example, is the New King James Version, which is a derivative of the King James 1611 version. And sometimes what we can find out is basically starting with the King James Version. In this specific case, there are things that have been edited. Now, I'm not saying they changed it, I'm just saying they edited things. And sometimes it was done in order to support certain specific doctrines, either doctrines of the Catholic Church or doctrines of specific belief. In this case, in order to support the Holy Trinity, that one line, holy, 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 was edited. In original earlier versions than the 1611 King James Version, we'll find that the word holy there is mentioned 9 times. 9 times the word holy is mentioned. So the significance there, again, as we read it, holy, 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 people will preach and teach that that represents the Holy Trinity. However, earlier versions, as far back as we can know, in the Latin and the Greek, whatever, the word holy there is 9 times. Now, you might suggest, what's the significance of this? Well, again, it could be a huge significance. We might think of that 9 times that the word holy is mentioned. We might think of it for the Father, the Son, and then the 7 spirits of God. That would be holy, would represent that 9 times. So something to think about there. Not a big thing, but it is something. So at any rate, we can have a little revelation there, you might say.
Can we know more about the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures within this first vision of the throne room?
And going a little bit further, there's more. With God, there is always more. If you like this video and like to see more, be sure to check out my website. It's www.coolcombat.com, because we battle against powers and principalities. But the cool thing is, the war has already been won. We may have battles to fight, but the war has already been won by Jesus Christ, our King of the universe. All things have already been put under his feet. You can also check out my YouTube page, which is www.thespiritofprophecy.com. I'd like to thank you for watching. I hope you got something out of it. Stick with me. I'm going to continue to show and tell you things probably you've never heard or seen before. And it's all about the book of Revelation. It's all about the good news of God. I thank you for watching. Be blessed.